When my son got married, I kept the ultimate secret. I never told him that I had inherited my late wife's $18 million ranch, and thank God I stayed silent. Because exactly 1 week after I paid for their lavish wedding, my brand new daughter-in-law marched into my living room with a notary and a piece of paper designed to leave me absolutely homeless. But her arrogant smirk vanished completely the moment she realized the document she was trying to force down my throat was actually her very own financial death warrant. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their greedy plans, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that ungrateful family members always get the karma they deserve. My name is Harrison Mitchell. I am 70 years old. I worked my entire life as a heavy machinery mechanic. I spent 40 years coming home with grease permanently stained under my fingernails and an aching back, all to make sure my family had a good, stable life. I am a simple man. I drive an old truck, I wear flannel shirts, and I live quietly. To Brittany, I was just a broke, washed-up grease monkey. She had no idea about the actual state of my finances. She did not know that my late wife, Evelyn, came from a very old, very wealthy family. Evelyn and I lived simply by choice, not by necessity. But Brittany only saw the surface. Just 7 days ago, exactly 1 week prior to this exact moment, I had paid $120,000 in cold hard cash to fund the extravagant Chicago wedding that Brittany absolutely demanded. She wanted a fairy tale. She wanted ice sculptures shaped like swans, imported flowers from overseas, a live jazz band, and a custom designer dress. I paid for all of it without complaining. I emptied a significant portion of my liquid savings because my son Tyler begged me to. He said it would make her happy. He said it would start their marriage off on the right foot. And now, 7 days later, she was standing in my living room demanding I sign away the roof over my head. Harrison, Brittany said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Tyler and I have been talking. We are just so worried about you living here all by yourself. Your health is not what it used to be, and this house is just too much work for you. I looked up at her, keeping my face completely blank. My health is perfectly fine, Brittany. I take a walk every morning. I fix my own meals. She waved her hand dismissively, as if my words were just the babbling of a confused child. Well, you know how things can change at your age. One day you are fine, the next day you fall down the stairs. Tyler and I decided that we need to start managing your assets for you. It is the responsible thing to do. We found a lovely assisted living facility just outside the city. It is very affordable. But before we can get you moved in, we need to transfer the deed of this house into our names. That way we can sell it and use the funds to cover your care. And whatever is left over, we can invest for our future family. I felt the air leave my lungs. A nursing home. A cheap state-run facility. She was standing in the home I had shared with my wife for 40 years, telling me she was going to lock me away in a facility and take the profits from my house to fund her own luxurious lifestyle. I slowly shifted my gaze away from Brittany, looking toward the hallway. Tyler had walked in shortly after her. He was 32 years old, wearing a sharp business casual outfit, holding a cup of artisan coffee he had bought on the way over. He was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had stayed up late helping with math homework, the boy whose college tuition I had paid in full by working double shifts at the dirty garage. Tyler was leaning against the doorframe. He absolutely refused to make eye contact with me. He was staring intensely at the screen of his smartphone, aggressively scrolling through something, pretending he was completely isolated from the cruel conversation happening right in front of him. Tyler, I said. My voice was low, carrying a heavy weight. Are you hearing this? Are you a part of this? Tyler shifted his weight uncomfortably. He finally glanced up, but his eyes darted quickly away from mine, landing on the floorboards. Dad, come on. Be reasonable, he mumbled. Brittany is right. You are getting older. We have to think about the future. It is just a piece of paper. It makes things easier for everyone. Easier for them, that was what he meant. The tension in the room skyrocketed. The silence grew incredibly thick. The notary shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly realizing he had walked into the middle of a massive, ugly family betrayal. He cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, I just need to verify your identification and witness your signature on the lines marked with the red tabs," he said quietly. Brittany stepped closer to the table, tapping her long manicured fingernail against the paper. "Just sign it, Harrison. We have a lot of errands to run today, and we do not have time to sit here and argue with you. You know you cannot take care of yourself anymore. We are doing you a massive favor." I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the legal document that would officially strip me of my primary residence. I looked at the daughter-in-law, who viewed me as nothing more than a stepping stone to a wealthy life. And finally, I looked at the son, who had completely surrendered his moral compass, allowing his wife to throw his grieving father out into the street just days after I had financed the most important day of his life. My heart hammered in my chest. A deep, burning anger started to ignite in the pit of my stomach. But I knew that exploding in rage would not help me. Yelling and screaming would only give Brittany the ammunition she needed to prove I was emotionally unstable. I needed to be smart. I needed to be highly strategic. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady my racing pulse. I reached my hand out toward the gold pen. I let my fingers tremble, putting on the perfect performance of a broken, defeated old man. As my fingers hovered over the gold pen, a million memories flooded my mind. I remembered the day Evelyn and I bought this house. It was a fixer-upper back then. We spent months painting the walls, sanding the hardwood floors, and planting the garden out back. Every single corner of this property held a piece of our beautiful history. To hand it over to this woman, this stranger who had entered our lives and immediately begun calculating our net worth, felt like a complete desecration of my wife's memory. Brittany did not see a home full of love. She saw square footage, market value, and liquid cash. She saw a way to fund the lavish lifestyle she constantly paraded on the internet. And Tyler, my boy. How had he become this weak person? Had I spoiled him too much? Had I shielded him from the struggles of the real world for so long that he no longer understood the value of loyalty or hard work? He stood there, a grown man, cowering behind the greedy ambitions of a woman who clearly did not respect him any more than she respected me. "Well," Brittany snapped, her voice breaking through my thoughts. Her fake patience was already wearing remarkably thin. She crossed her arms over her chest. "We are waiting, Harrison. The notary charges by the hour." I kept my hand suspended over the pen. I let my hand shake violently. I needed them to believe that I was completely overwhelmed, that I was frail, and that I was bending to their will. I needed them to think they had won this opening battle so they would never see the absolute war I was about to wage. I knew exactly what I had to do. I could not sign the paper, but I also could not refuse outright, or they would escalate the situation before I had a chance to secure my defenses. I had to buy myself some time. Just a few precious minutes to make a phone call that would change the trajectory of all our lives. I pulled my hand back from the gold pen. I placed my hands flat on my knees and looked directly into Brittany's eyes. The fake trembling stopped. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the fear she desperately wanted to see. "I am not signing this document," I said clearly. "I am not giving you my home, and I am not moving into a state facility just so you can fund your lifestyle." The silence that followed my refusal was deafening. The notary took a step backward, clutching his leather briefcase against his chest. Brittany's eyes widened in genuine shock, but that shock lasted for only a fraction of a second, before melting into pure rage. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law act completely vanished. The mask slipped off, revealing the deeply entitled woman she truly was. Her face turned an ugly shade of red. Her manicured hands balled into tight fists. "Who do you think you are talking to?" she snarled. "You are a washed-up grease monkey. You are an old, useless man taking up space in a house that should rightfully belong to us. We are trying to build a future, and you are a stubborn obstacle standing in our way. You are trespassing in my home, Harrison. You have overstayed your welcome. Her home. The absolute audacity of that statement hung in the air. She had not contributed a single dollar to the mortgage. Just 1 week ago, I had written a check for $120,000 to pay for her dream wedding, and now she was standing in the living room, claiming it as her own territory. I needed to let them reveal their hand. I slowly turned my head toward the hallway, looking at my son. "Tyler," I said, keeping my voice soft and deliberately vulnerable, "are you going to let her speak to your father this way? Are you really going to stand there and let your wife throw me onto the street?" I waited for the boy I had raised to defend me. I waited for a flicker of shame, a momentary lapse of conscience, or even just a hesitant apology. But Tyler did not apologize. He finally put his smartphone inside his pocket and stepped into the living room, crossing the space to stand directly beside his wife. He placed his hand on Brittany's shoulder in a show of unified solidarity. The coldness in his eyes chilled me. It was a look of pure calculation, completely devoid of familial warmth. "Brittany is right, Dad," Tyler said. His tone was flat, completely detached, as if discussing a business transaction rather than the fate of his own father. "We have been more than patient with you. We have given you plenty of time to process Mom's passing. But life moves on, and we cannot put our future on hold just because you refuse to adapt to reality. You are living in the past, and you are dragging us down. This house is a gold mine, and it is entirely wasted on a single elderly man." Tyler took another step forward, looming over the coffee table. He looked down at me with an expression of profound condescension. "Here is how this is going to work," he stated, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding register. "You are going to pick up that gold pen, and you will sign the quitclaim deed right now. You are going to transfer the property into our names. If you cooperate, we will make sure you get a nice, comfortable bed at the assisted living facility. But if you decide to be difficult, if you stubbornly refuse to sign that paper, I will personally pick up my phone and call the police." The heavy threat hung in the air, cold and suffocating. I looked at my son, genuinely struggling to comprehend the cruel words coming out of his mouth. "You would call the police on your own father?" I asked, letting my voice waver. "I will tell the dispatch officers that an aggressive, confused old man is trespassing on my property." Tyler continued, completely ignoring my emotional plea. "I will tell them that you are suffering from severe dementia, that you are a danger to yourself and to my wife, and that you are refusing to leave our premises. They will arrive in minutes. They will forcefully remove you from this house and place you in a state psychiatric ward for an involuntary evaluation. Once you are in the system as a mentally incompetent ward of the state, taking control of your assets will be incredibly easy for me. You will be left with absolutely nothing, locked in a miserable, underfunded county hospital forever." The sheer ruthlessness of his plan was staggering. He had thought of everything. If I exploded in anger now, if I shouted or fought back, I would play directly into his narrative. I would give him the exact ammunition he needed to convince the authorities that I was a hostile, unpredictable, and senile old man. I had to suppress the raging fire in my chest. I had to swallow my pride and lean into the pathetic character they assigned to me. I allowed my shoulders to slump forward, physically collapsing under the heavy weight of his brutal ultimatum. I let out a soft, ragged gasp, ensuring my breathing sounded shallow and panicked. "Please," I whispered, staring down at my knees. "Please do not do this to me. I am your father. I gave you everything." Brittany scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes in absolute disgust. "Stop the pathetic dramatics, Harrison. It is truly embarrassing to watch a grown man whine like a helpless infant. Pick up the pen and sign your name on the dotted line. Do it before Tyler loses his patience and makes that call." I slowly reached my right hand out toward the coffee table. I commanded my muscles to shake violently, mimicking the severe tremors of a terrified, frail senior citizen whose spirit had been entirely broken. My fingers hovered over the heavy gold pen. I could feel their hungry, expectant eyes burning into the back of my neck. They thought they had won. They thought I was completely defeated. I touched the cold metal of the pen, clumsily pushing it off the edge of the table. It tumbled through the air and landed silently on the woven rug near my old boots. "Oh, I am so incredibly sorry," I stammered, keeping my head bowed low to hide the sharp, calculated focus in my eyes. My hands are just shaking so badly. I cannot seem to grip anything right now. I feel very dizzy and my chest hurts terribly. I need a minute to calm my nerves. Tyler groaned in deep frustration, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You are absolutely impossible," he muttered angrily. I stared blankly at the gold pen. The performance was flawless. They had backed me into a corner but failed to realize I had designed it. I bought myself the precious window of time I desperately needed. Now I just had to calmly execute the next crucial step of my silent counterattack without them noticing. I stared at the pen resting on the woven rug, my breathing intentionally shallow and ragged. I pressed my hand flat against the center of my chest, clutching the worn fabric of my flannel shirt as if my heart were physically failing. "I am so incredibly sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling with practiced fragility. "My chest is feeling so very tight, and my vision is getting horribly blurry. The letters on that legal document are swimming together. I just need a few minutes to catch my breath and go upstairs to fetch my reading glasses." Brittany let out a loud, dramatic sigh of pure exasperation, tossing her expensive handbag onto the nearby armchair. "You have got to be kidding me," she snapped, crossing her arms tightly. "We do not have all day to deal with this nonsense." Tyler ran his hands nervously through his styled hair, looking at the notary who was awkwardly staring at the ceiling. "Just go get your glasses, Dad," Tyler muttered, his voice laced with venom and profound annoyance. "Be quick about it. We are not leaving this room until you put your signature on that dotted line." I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes locked on the ground. I grabbed the sturdy wooden handrail of the staircase and began my slow, agonizing ascent to the second floor. I made sure to drag my heavy work boots against the carpeted steps, portraying the image of a defeated, broken man who had entirely given up the fight. I could hear Brittany complaining loudly in the living room below, telling my son how absolutely exhausting it was to deal with such a stubborn old burden. I absorbed every single cruel word, letting it fuel my quiet determination. The moment I reached the top landing, my entire demeanor completely shifted. The pathetic slouch instantly vanished from my posture. My breathing returned to a steady, calm rhythm. I walked purposefully down the long hallway and entered the master bedroom that I had shared with Evelyn for 4 beautiful decades. I stepped inside and immediately pushed the heavy brass lock on the solid oak door until it clicked securely into place. I did not walk over to the wooden nightstand to search for my reading glasses. I did not need them. My vision was perfectly crystal clear. Instead, I reached into the deep front pocket of my denim jeans and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped across the screen and immediately dialed the direct personal number of Jonathan Carter. Jonathan was not a cheap local attorney. He was a brilliant, highly expensive, and incredibly cutthroat trust and estate lawyer who operated out of a high-rise office in downtown Chicago. He was the man who had meticulously structured all the complex family assets of my late wife, ensuring that her extensive generational wealth remained completely protected from any outside interference or opportunistic, greedy family members. The phone rang twice before Jonathan answered. His voice was sharp, professional, and alert. "Harrison, my friend," Jonathan said smoothly. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this morning call? Is everything proceeding smoothly with the estate documents we recently finalized?" I turned my back to the locked door and walked slowly toward the large bay window that overlooked our quiet suburban street. The morning sun was shining brightly, casting a warm golden glow across the room. I took a deep breath, preparing to set the wheels of my calculated retribution into motion. "Jonathan," I replied, "I need you to pull up my file immediately. My son and his new wife are currently standing in my living room with a hired notary. They have ambushed me with a quitclaim deed, and they are aggressively threatening to forcibly remove me from this property and have me declared mentally incompetent if I refuse to sign my house away to them." I heard the sharp clicking of a computer keyboard on the other end of the line. Jonathan let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. The arrogant fools. Jonathan stopped typing, and his tone turned incredibly serious. I warned Evelyn that Tyler might attempt a stunt like this once she passed away, Jonathan stated firmly. His wife has clearly accelerated his greed. I assume you have not signed a single piece of paper they placed in front of you. Absolutely not, I confirmed. I feigned a panic attack and told them I needed my reading glasses. They actually believe they have me cornered. They think I am just an ignorant, helpless mechanic who will blindly surrender to their cruel intimidation tactics to keep the peace. Let them keep thinking that Jonathan advised smoothly. We will use their blinding arrogance against them. As I listened to Jonathan outline the initial steps of our legal defense, my eyes drifted over to the polished wooden dresser near the window. Resting there was a beautiful silver-framed photograph of my late wife, Evelyn. She was smiling brightly in the picture, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, standing proudly against a backdrop of breathtaking snow-capped mountains and endless green pastures. I reached out and gently traced the edge of the cool silver frame with my thumb. Brittany thought I was nothing more than a broke, uneducated mechanic who had spent his entire life turning wrenches for a meager hourly wage. She thought she was the smartest person in the room, moving chess pieces around to steal my modest suburban home. What she did not know was the massive monumental secret my late wife and I had kept hidden from the world for decades. 3 years ago, Evelyn knew her health was beginning to slowly decline. She also knew that her son was becoming increasingly obsessed with maintaining a flashy, expensive luxury lifestyle. To protect her legacy from Tyler and any future spouse he might marry, Evelyn secretly transferred the absolute ownership of the crown jewel of her family. She legally bypassed the traditional inheritance structure entirely. She signed over a sprawling, breathtaking 1,500-acre estate located directly in the heart of Bozeman, Montana. It was a pristine, highly coveted piece of real estate surrounded by crystal-clear rivers, dense pine forests, and towering mountain peaks. It was an area where billionaires were desperately flocking to buy land, driving property values through the absolute roof. That majestic Montana ranch, free and clear of any mortgages or liens, was currently valued at a staggering $18 million. And Evelyn had quietly, legally, and permanently transferred it solely into my name. It belonged completely to the clueless grease monkey currently standing inside the master bedroom. I smiled warmly at the photograph of my gorgeous late wife, feeling a profound surge of immense gratitude for her incredibly brilliant foresight and her fiercely protective wisdom. "Jonathan," I said into the phone, keeping my voice remarkably steady, smooth, and incredibly cold. "I want you to prepare all the necessary legal injunctions right away. I am going to walk downstairs, and I am going to let those fools blindly play their greedy, pathetic little hand. They will never see this catastrophic retaliation coming, and I will make them pay." Jonathan remained perfectly silent on the other end of the line, allowing my fierce declaration to settle between us. He knew better than to interrupt a man who had just fully accepted the painful reality of a family betrayal. I took a slow breath, letting the anger crystallize into a sharp, unbreakable focus. I needed to explain exactly how I knew this dark ambush was coming. I told him in detail about the luxurious wedding reception that took place exactly 1 week ago. It was a lavish affair held at a premium downtown hotel. The ballroom was completely draped in white silk and expensive imported floral arrangements. Hundreds of guests were drinking premium champagne, celebrating the supposed beautiful union of two young lovers. I had stepped away from the incredibly deafening noise of the live jazz band, desperately seeking a brief moment of quiet refuge. I walked down a secluded, dimly lit corridor that led toward the private restrooms near the back of the venue. The heavy mahogany doors muffled the loud music from the main hall. As I approached the corner, I heard the sharp, distinct clicking of expensive heels against the polished marble floor. I recognized that arrogant, rhythmic sound immediately. It was Brittany. She was pacing back and forth in the narrow alcove just outside the men's room, speaking rapidly into her cell phone. I instinctively stopped walking, pressing my back flat against the cool wallpaper, completely hidden from her line of sight in the deep shadows. I did not intend to eavesdrop on a private conversation, but the sheer venom in her tone instantly paralyzed me. She was not speaking to a close friend or a relative. She was negotiating aggressively with a prominent commercial real estate broker who operated exclusively in the wealthy western states. Her cruel words sliced through the quiet corridor like a jagged blade. I heard her explicitly map out a truly horrifying plan. She told the man on the phone that they just needed a few more weeks to finalize the paperwork regarding the clueless old man. Those were her exact words. She was absolutely convinced that I was just a naive mechanic who lacked the basic intelligence to understand complex legal documents. She proudly explained how they were going to swiftly manipulate me into signing away my modest primary residence under the guise of an early inheritance transition. Once that house was legally in their greedy hands, she gleefully detailed the next far more sinister phase of her grand scheme. She planned to forcefully place me into a cheap, heavily underfunded state-run care facility, ensuring I would never be able to interfere with their lives again. But the absolute worst part was hearing what she intended to do next. She arrogantly told the broker that she was aware of the massive piece of land in Montana. She falsely assumed that it would simply pass to Tyler through normal probate channels once they declared me completely mentally incompetent. She ordered the greedy broker to begin quietly drawing up aggressive liquidation contracts for the property. She wanted to sell the pristine $18 million ranch to the highest corporate bidder the second they gained legal conservatorship over my estate. She vividly described how she would use the massive profits from the immediate liquidation to personally fund a ridiculously expensive luxury technology startup she had been dreaming of launching. She spoke about destroying my entire life and completely liquidating my beautiful late wife's precious, sacred generational legacy with the extremely casual, indifferent tone of someone blindly ordering a simple cup of coffee. Standing there, in the cold shadows of the hallway, my heart physically ached. I desperately wanted to believe that this was solely the wicked ambition of a greedy daughter-in-law. I prayed that my son was entirely unaware of this incredibly monstrous plot. But my desperate hopes were violently crushed just seconds later. The heavy door to the men's room swung open, and Tyler stepped out, adjusting his expensive, tailored silk tuxedo jacket. He casually walked over to his new bride, wrapping his arm comfortably around her waist. I held my breath, terrified that they would hear my heart pounding against my ribs. Brittany ended her call with a bright, victorious laugh. She turned to my son and kissed his cheek. She happily informed him that the eager broker was fully prepared to move forward with the immediate sale of the Montana property the moment they secured the required legal signatures from the pathetic mechanic. Tyler did not gasp in shock. He did not reprimand her for plotting to lock his grieving father inside a miserable institution. Instead, he smiled down at her and nodded in complete agreement. He coldly told her that the strategy was flawless, adding that they just needed to play the roles of concerned, loving children for a little while longer until the fresh ink on the documents was dry. That was the exact moment the father inside of me finally died. Hearing his casual complicity severed the last fragile string of paternal protection I held in my soul. My son had transformed into a ruthless, hollow shell of a man, poisoned by an endless thirst for a flashy lifestyle. The agonizing, painful flashback ended in my troubled mind, swiftly bringing me sharply back to the harsh present moment inside my locked, very quiet bedroom. Jonathan listened to my recount of that dark night with absolute, unwavering professionalism. When I finally finished speaking, his voice returned through the speaker, carrying the heavy, solid weight of absolute legal certainty. "Harrison," he said, speaking slowly and deliberately to ensure I understood the immense power I currently held. "Let them plot. Let them scheme. Your assets are completely ironclad, and thoroughly, completely impenetrable. Evelyn was an exceptionally brilliant woman. The way we structured the trust and the strict property transfer guarantees that neither Tyler nor his wicked wife can ever legally touch a single blade of grass in Montana. They are hunting a ghost. I felt a tremendous wave of reassuring relief wash over my tired shoulders. I thanked Jonathan sincerely for his unwavering, steadfast dedication to protecting my late wife's final wishes. I instructed him to prepare the necessary defensive filings and to remain on high alert for our next move. We ended the phone call, and I carefully slipped the mobile device back into the deep pocket of my worn denim jeans. I slowly walked over to the heavy wooden dresser and opened the top drawer. I reached inside and pulled out an old scratched pair of reading glasses. I slid them onto my face, peering through the slightly smudged lenses. I took one last look at Evelyn's beautiful photograph, silently promising her that I would never allow those vultures to destroy the magnificent legacy she had entrusted to me. I unlocked the heavy bedroom door and stepped back out into the long, carpeted hallway. It was time to return downstairs. It was time to face the impatient wolves waiting in my living room, completely unaware that the frail old sheep they were trying to corner was actually the one quietly building an inescapable, fatal trap. I walked slowly down the carpeted stairs, my hand resting heavily on the wooden banister. Every step I took was highly deliberate and carefully calculated. I reached the bottom landing and paused, taking a slow, deep breath before stepping back into the living room. Brittany was tapping her expensive high heel against the hardwood floor in a frantic rhythm. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face twisted in an ugly expression of sheer impatience. The hired notary was still standing awkwardly near the sofa, repeatedly checking his silver wristwatch, clearly wanting to escape this toxic environment. Tyler was leaning against the stone mantel, glaring at me, as if my mere physical existence was a massive inconvenience to his schedule. I adjusted the scratched reading glasses on my nose, ensuring I looked exactly like the helpless, confused old man they expected to see. I walked over to the coffee table and looked down at the thick stack of legal papers. I did not reach for the heavy gold pen. Instead, I looked directly at my son, Tyler. I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and purposely hesitant. I have been thinking about this upstairs. This is a very big decision. It is my home. It is where your mother and I raised you from a little boy. I cannot just sign away the deed without fully understanding all the binding legal implications. I am going to need to take these documents to the local parish attorney down the street. I will have him review every single page, and then we can discuss this further next week. The tense silence in the room shattered instantly. Brittany let out a sharp, mocking laugh, throwing her hands up in the air in pure disbelief. Next week, she scoffed loudly. We do not have until next week, Harrison. You are signing that paper right now. I shook my head slowly, maintaining my stubborn but frail facade. No, Brittany. I will not sign anything today. My mind is made up. I need professional legal advice before I make a permanent decision of this immense magnitude. The exact moment those defiant words left my mouth, Tyler completely lost his temper. The calm, detached businessman instantly vanished. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson. He pushed himself forcefully off the stone mantel and stormed across the living room, closing the distance between us in 3 aggressive strides. He violently snatched the entire stack of documents off the coffee table, the thick pages crumpling fiercely in his tight, furious grip. "You are so unbelievably selfish!" he screamed, his loud voice echoing sharply off the walls. "You have always been a stubborn, narrow-minded fool. We are trying to set up our lives. We are trying to build a wealthy, successful future, and you are purposefully dragging us down into the mud. You think you are protecting this worthless old house, but you are just proving how entirely useless you really are." He pointed a shaking finger mere inches from my face. I stood my ground, staring into the cold eyes of the boy I absolutely no longer recognized. "Tyler, just listen to yourself," I said quietly. You are aggressively demanding I make myself completely homeless so you can buy luxury cars and expensive designer clothes. Is this what your mother and I taught you? Do not bring my mother into this, he roared, completely unhinged and blinded by his own toxic ambition. She would want me to be successful. She would want me to have absolutely everything I deserve in this world. You are the only one standing in my way. You are a massive deadweight, Dad. And if you walk out that door right now, if you stubbornly refuse to sign this deed today, you are completely dead to me. Do you hear me? You are dead to me. He stepped even closer, towering over me with pure, unadulterated malice. If you ruin this financial deal for us, you will never set foot in my house again. You will never be a part of our lives. And when Brittany and I finally have children, you will never be allowed to meet them. You will die alone in a cheap, filthy facility, and your future grandchildren will not even know your name. That is my ultimate promise to you. The absolute cruelty of his brutal threat hung heavily in the air. He was literally using unborn children as a psychological weapon just to steal a piece of real estate. I looked at his angry, contorted face, and a profound, agonizing sorrow settled deep within my chest. I did not feel the urge to argue anymore. I did not feel the desperate need to beg for his affection or his mercy. All I felt was the chilling realization that my beautiful wife had been entirely correct all along. Evelyn knew this exact devastating moment would eventually happen. Before she died 6 months ago, when her physical body was rapidly failing, but her brilliant mind remained razor-sharp, she called me into our quiet bedroom. She held my calloused hand tightly and warned me about the incredibly dark path our son was walking. She saw exactly how his growing obsession with the luxury lifestyle, the flashy sports cars, and the superficial status symbols was slowly but surely eroding his moral foundation. She saw how Brittany constantly fed that toxic ambition, manipulating him into a greedy, entitled shell of a man who cared only about money. Evelyn begged me to be careful. She told me that true character is only ever revealed when massive amounts of money are placed on the table. She made me promise to test him. She made me solemnly promise to see if he would choose his family or his relentless greed when pushed to the absolute brink. I desperately wanted her to be wrong. I wanted to believe that the good, honest boy we raised was still buried somewhere deep inside that expensive, tailored suit. But standing here right now, listening to him viciously threaten to erase me from his life over a simple piece of property, I knew she had been perfectly right. The test was over, and Tyler had failed in the most spectacular, devastating way imaginable. I looked at Brittany, who was standing securely behind him, with a smug, highly victorious smirk plastered on her face. She thought Tyler had broken me. She thought the threat of family isolation would force me to grovel and sign the papers. They believed my love for my son was a weakness they could exploit indefinitely. They were severely mistaken. I adjusted my posture, standing slightly taller. My voice no longer wavered. It was completely solid, devoid of any fear or hesitation. I understand your terms, Tyler, I said, clearly holding his angry gaze without flinching. You have made your priorities very obvious today. I turned my back on them and walked slowly toward the front hall closet to retrieve my old canvas coat. I did not look back. I did not offer another apology. I was ready to leave them to their empty, arrogant victory, knowing perfectly well that the real consequences of their actions were already waiting patiently in the shadows. I walked up the staircase one final time. The wooden steps groaned under the weight of my heavy boots. Each sound felt like a quiet farewell to the home where I had spent the best years of my life. I entered the guest bedroom that had become my temporary sanctuary over the past week. I pulled an old, battered leather suitcase from the back of the closet. It was heavily scuffed along the edges, carrying the visible scars of decades of travel. I opened it on the simple twin bed and began carefully folding my few belongings. I packed 3 faded flannel shirts, a couple of pairs of sturdy denim jeans, and my trusty mechanic coveralls. I did not own expensive, tailored suits or designer watches like my son. My entire wardrobe probably cost less than the imported shoes Brittany was currently wearing. As I placed my simple clothes into the worn suitcase, I listened closely to the sounds echoing from the first floor. The heavy silence of the house had been completely shattered by a sudden, sharp pop. It was the unmistakable, joyous sound of a pressurized cork being forcefully released from a premium glass bottle. I slowly zipped my battered suitcase closed and gripped the worn leather handle. I stepped out into the hallway and made my way back down the stairs. As I descended, the cheerful clinking of crystal glasses drifted toward me from the direction of the modern open-concept kitchen. I paused near the bottom step, completely hidden in the dim shadows of the adjoining corridor. I peered around the edge of the drywall to observe the incredibly painful scene unfolding before me. Tyler and Brittany were standing by the expansive marble island. Brittany was pouring a bubbling golden liquid into two tall, elegant crystal flutes. It was an expensive bottle of vintage champagne, the kind they only opened for major milestones. She handed a glass to my son, and her face was absolutely radiant, with a triumphant, victorious glow. Tyler raised his crystal flute high in the air, a broad, relaxed smile spreading across his face. "Here is to our brand new beginning," Tyler declared proudly, his voice carrying a light, carefree tone. "Here is to a future without any unnecessary dead weight holding us back." Brittany laughed brightly, tapping her glass against his with a crisp musical chime. To finally getting rid of the ultimate freeloader, she added viciously, taking a long, celebratory sip. I stood frozen in the cold shadows, listening to my own flesh and blood openly celebrate my painful banishment. They were drinking expensive champagne to honor the exact moment they rendered an old man completely homeless. They did not feel an ounce of guilt. They did not express a single moment of remorse for discarding me like a piece of broken, unwanted furniture. They were entirely consumed by their own arrogant greed. I tightened my grip on the handle of my battered suitcase. I knew I needed to maintain my carefully constructed performance until the very last second. I stepped out from the dark corridor and walked slowly into the bright, illuminated entryway. My heavy boots thudded against the polished hardwood floor, announcing my final departure. Tyler and Brittany instantly stopped laughing. They lowered their crystal glasses and turned to watch me approach the heavy front door. I kept my shoulders slumped forward and my gaze fixed firmly on the ground. I did not look at the champagne bottle. I did not acknowledge their cruel, heartless celebration. I simply reached out with a trembling hand and turned the cold brass doorknob. The heavy wooden door swung open, revealing the dark, freezing night air. A sharp gust of cold wind rushed into the warm house, biting at my face and pulling at the collar of my canvas coat. I stepped over the threshold, dragging my scuffed suitcase behind me. I played the part of the tragic, deeply abandoned father with absolute flawless perfection. I paused for just a fraction of a second on the concrete porch, offering them one final opportunity to call me back. I waited for Tyler to realize the monumental gravity of what he was doing. But the only sound that followed me out into the freezing darkness was the loud, definitive slam of the heavy front door closing forcefully behind my back. The sharp click of the deadbolt locking securely into place signaled the absolute end of our relationship. I walked slowly down the paved driveway toward my old, reliable pickup truck, parked under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. The winter chill seeped through my thin jacket, but I barely noticed the dropping temperature. My mind was already racing miles ahead, focusing entirely on the intricate steps of the massive counterattack I was about to unleash. I hoisted my battered suitcase into the rusted bed of the truck. I climbed heavily into the driver's seat and pulled the heavy door shut. I inserted the metal key into the ignition and turned it firmly. The old engine roared to life, a familiar, comforting rumble in the dead silence of the night. I turned on the headlights, casting a bright yellow beam across the frosted pavement. As I shifted the gear into drive and pulled slowly away from the manicured suburban lawn, my entire physical posture drastically transformed. The heavy, tragic slouch instantly evaporated. I straightened my back against the worn leather seat. I rolled my shoulders and took a deep, steadying breath, filling my lungs with the crisp winter air. I looked into the rearview mirror, watching the bright lights of their luxury house slowly fade into the dark, distant shadows. I did not shed a single tear for the son I had lost. My hands did not tremble on the worn steering wheel. I felt an incredible surge of pure, relentless energy coursing through my veins. Instead of feeling broken, a slow, incredibly cold smile spread across my weathered face. Tyler and Brittany genuinely believed they had won the ultimate victory today. They thought they had successfully eliminated their biggest obstacle by violently kicking me out into the freezing street. They were probably already planning how to spend the millions they falsely believed they were about to steal. But what those arrogant fools completely failed to realize was that my battered, tattered suitcase did not just contain a few folded flannel shirts and old denim jeans. Hidden securely beneath the false fabric lining of that scuffed leather bag was a heavily encrypted high-capacity master hard drive. For the past 4 weeks, that silent spinning drive had been actively receiving and permanently recording high-definition audio and video feeds from the 6 microscopic state-of-the-art security cameras I quietly and expertly installed in every primary room of their house weeks ago. I knew exactly what they were going to do next, because I had intentionally planted the bait they were currently hunting for. I had every corner of their secretive lives under absolute and total surveillance, and I was going to eagerly watch their entire greedy empire burn completely to the ground, leaving them with absolutely nothing left in the near future. I drove through the frost-covered streets, leaving the sprawling suburbs behind, as the glittering skyline of downtown Chicago began to rise in the distance. My truck heater rattled, pushing warm air against the freezing windshield. I did not drive to a cheap motel, nor did I head toward the bleak state facility Brittany had gleefully selected for my final days. Instead, I navigated my rusted vehicle into the pristine underground parking garage of the most exclusive 5-star hotel in the financial district. The valet attendant blinked in surprise at my grease-stained boots and worn coat, but his hesitation vanished the moment I handed him a heavy, solid metal black credit card. It was an invitation-only account tied directly to Evelyn's heavily guarded private trust, offering a practically limitless ceiling. Tyler and Brittany had spent 3 years meticulously tracking my modest pension checks, completely oblivious to the vast generational wealth secured behind this sleek piece of metal. I bypassed reception and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. The mahogany doors opened into a breathtaking penthouse suite featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the icy waters of Lake Michigan. I dropped my suitcase onto the plush designer rug and walked straight to the expansive glass dining table. I pulled a sleek laptop from a hidden compartment in my bag. I plugged in the encrypted master hard drive, my fingers moving with the precise speed of a man who had planned every detail of this night. The computer screen flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow across the dark, silent room. I confidently launched the secure surveillance software, and within seconds, a grid of 6 high-definition video feeds populated my screen, displaying rooms inside my son's house in real time. I sat back in the leather chair, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water, and focused my attention entirely on the lower right quadrant of the screen. The camera was perfectly positioned in the damp, unfinished basement of their home. Before my exit, I had purposely left behind several heavy cardboard boxes labeled with thick marker marked as personal financial records and old tax returns. I knew their arrogant champagne celebration in the kitchen would not last very long. Greed is a restless disease, and soon enough, the intoxicating thrill of kicking me out would be replaced by the frantic need to legally secure the property they believed they had conquered. Sure enough, 2 hours after I walked out the front door, the basement door swung open. The harsh fluorescent overhead lights flickered on, illuminating the dusty concrete floor. Tyler and Brittany quickly and eagerly sprinted down the wooden stairs, abandoning their crystal champagne flutes for the frantic work of scavenging through an old man's private life. Watching them through the crystal-clear digital feed was a profoundly disturbing experience. They behaved like starving animals tearing into a fresh carcass. Brittany dropped to her knees, ripping the packing tape off the first cardboard box with aggressive tearing motions. She began tossing decades of my life carelessly over her shoulder. Old family photo albums, faded birthday cards from when Tyler was a boy, and bundles of heartfelt love letters I had written to Evelyn were dumped onto the dirty floor. She did not pause to look at a single photograph. She did not hesitate to trample over the precious memories of a mother who loved her son unconditionally. She was blindly hunting for bank statements, for hidden account numbers, for anything that could grant them immediate legal access to my assets. Tyler was right beside her, ripping through a stack of old utility bills and expired insurance policies, his face twisted in a mask of sheer desperation. He was sweating heavily, muttering angry curses under his breath every time a file folder turned out to be completely empty and useless. I carefully zoomed in on the camera feed, enhancing the audio to hear their frantic conversation. Tyler tossed a stack of useless receipts aside, complaining bitterly that I must have hidden the property deeds somewhere else. Brittany snapped back at him, her voice shrill and demanding, ordering him to keep digging until his fingers bled. They were tearing apart the history of our family, looking for a shortcut to wealth. I watched this pathetic display of moral bankruptcy with absolute emotional detachment. The pain of betrayal had already burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold ash of resolve. I had carefully curated the specific contents of those cardboard boxes over a week ago. I removed any document that held genuine sentimental or financial value, replacing them with a mountain of meaningless paperwork designed to exhaust and frustrate them. But buried at the very bottom of the third box, safely tucked inside a bright red folder, was the ultimate piece of poisoned bait. I patiently watched the bright glowing screen, waiting for the inevitable moment. It took them nearly an hour of frantic, exhausted searching. Brittany let out a frustrated groan as she dumped the final stack of papers onto the concrete floor. The bright red folder slid out from the pile, landing directly at Tyler's feet. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and slowly reached down to pick it up. I leaned closer to my laptop screen, my heart beating in a steady, measured rhythm. Tyler opened the red folder and began scanning the bold black text on the first page. I watched his eyes widen dramatically. His mouth fell open in a silent gasp. He grabbed Brittany by the shoulder, shaking her aggressively, and shoved the document into her hands. Brittany's eyes darted rapidly across the page, processing the legal terminology. The exhaustion vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a wicked, triumphant ear-to-ear grin. She let out a sharp, joyful scream, throwing her arms around Tyler's neck in a tight embrace. They jumped up and down in the middle of the ruined basement, celebrating their discovery. They had found exactly what I wanted them to find. It was an outdated medical power of attorney. 2 years prior, long before Evelyn passed away, I had been admitted to the hospital for a sudden emergency appendix surgery. It was a standard procedure, but hospital protocol required me to designate a legal proxy to make healthcare decisions on my behalf in the rare event that complications arose during the operation. I naturally assigned those emergency medical rights to my son. The document clearly granted Tyler specific, highly limited authority over my physical healthcare directives for a duration of exactly 30 days. After I recovered and was discharged from the hospital, the document legally expired, rendering it completely void and entirely useless. I had tossed it into a filing cabinet and forgotten all about it until I needed the perfect lure for my trap. As I watched them dance around the basement, clutching the expired document, I knew exactly what was racing through their greedy, twisted minds. To a desperate, uneducated thief, a single piece of paper with an official legal seal and a bold title containing the words, "Power of Attorney," looked exactly like a golden ticket to unlimited, unimaginable wealth. I sat in the quiet luxury of the downtown penthouse, my eyes fixed on the glowing monitor. The digital clock on the bottom corner of the screen indicated it was now early the next morning. Tyler and Brittany had barely slept. They had spent the entire night pacing back and forth in the living room, whispering frantically about their newfound treasure. The expired medical document had fueled a dangerous fire in their minds, but they both knew that a piece of paper limiting authority to healthcare decisions would not give them access to my financial assets. They needed to alter it. They needed to transform it into a weapon capable of unlocking the vault they believed I was hiding. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy front doorbell rang. The camera angle shifted slightly as the front door opened, revealing the same nervous man in the cheap, ill-fitting gray suit who had stood in my living room yesterday. It was the corrupt notary. He scurried inside, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected the police to be following him. Brittany led him straight to the dining room table, where the red folder was already waiting. She offered him a cup of coffee, but her voice was tight with impatient urgency. I leaned closer to the screen, turning up the audio feed to catch every detail. The notary sat down heavily, wiping a bead of sweat from his upper lip. Tyler placed the old medical power of attorney on the table, pointing to the specific paragraphs that restricted his authority to hospital decisions. He told the notary that they needed those restrictions removed completely. He explained that his father had become completely uncooperative and that they needed immediate legal control over the entire estate. The notary hesitated nervously, tapping his fingers against his leather briefcase. He explained that altering a legally binding document after the fact was a severe federal offense. He warned them that if the banks scrutinized the paperwork and found discrepancies, they would all be facing serious jail time. Brittany did not flinch. She simply walked over to her designer handbag, pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills, and dropped them directly in front of the sweating man. She told him that there was $10,000 in that stack, and there would be another $10,000 waiting for him the moment the ink dried on a new document. I watched as greed instantly overpowered the fear of the notary. He stared at the cash for a long moment, then reached out and pulled it into his briefcase. He opened his bag and pulled out a fresh stack of blank legal paper, a portable printer, and his official state seal. For the next hour, I watched a masterclass in absolute criminal desperation. They carefully scanned my original document into his laptop. They meticulously deleted the word medical from the header, replacing it with the heavy sweeping terminology of a general durable power of attorney. They completely erased the restrictive clauses, typing in new sweeping paragraphs that granted Tyler absolute unchecked authority over all my real estate bank accounts and investment portfolios. The most sickening part was watching them forge my signature. Tyler practiced tracing my handwriting on a scrap piece of paper for 20 minutes, mimicking the slight slant and the heavy pressure of my pen strokes. He laughed quietly to himself as he perfected the forgery, boasting to his wife about how incredibly easy it was to steal the entire identity of a man. When he felt confident, he signed the bottom of the newly minted, completely fraudulent document. The corrupt notary then pressed his official metal stamp into the paper, permanently sealing their monumental crime with the illusion of government authenticity. With the forged document completely finished, Brittany could no longer contain her excitement. She began pacing around the dining room table, her eyes wide with a frantic, greedy energy. She clapped her hands together and finally laid out the magnificent masterstroke of her wicked scheme. She told Tyler and the notary they were not going to waste time dealing with traditional, slow-moving commercial banks. She explained that a standard bank would require extensive background checks, credit evaluations, and weeks of tedious underwriting before approving any type of massive loan. They might even insist on speaking to me directly, which would instantly destroy the entire operation. Instead, Brittany revealed her brilliant shortcut. She had already been in contact with an aggressive, predatory, hard money lender. These private financial institutions did not care about credit scores or extensive background checks. They only cared about one thing: massive, undeniable collateral. She told Tyler that they were going to use the forged, durable power of attorney to pledge my breathtaking Montana ranch as the ultimate collateral for an immediate high-interest loan. She had done her research perfectly. She knew that private lenders moved with lightning speed, often wiring millions of dollars within a matter of days, as long as the underlying asset was undeniably valuable. Tyler looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. He asked her exactly how much money they were now going to request from the private lender. Brittany smiled a wide, predatory grin that stretched across her face. $5 million, she whispered the words, hanging in the air like a poisonous cloud. She told him that $5 million in immediate liquid cash would be more than enough to completely fund their brand-new luxury lifestyle. They could immediately buy the expensive sports cars they wanted, book first-class flights to Europe, and finally launch the highly exclusive tech startup she had been dreaming about for years. She explained that the hard money lender would secure the loan by placing a massive lien directly against the Montana property. Because they falsely believed that I was a senile, clueless old man who had no idea what was happening, they assumed I would simply default on the expensive monthly payments. Brittany gleefully mapped out the inevitable conclusion. When the loan eventually defaulted, the ruthless private lender would aggressively seize the majestic $18 million ranch and liquidate it to recover their funds. I would lose the precious generational land that my late wife had entrusted to me, and Tyler and Brittany would be sitting on a beach with $5 million in stolen, untraceable cash. The notary packed up his equipment, his hands trembling slightly as he realized the sheer magnitude of the financial fraud he had just facilitated. Tyler clapped him on the shoulder, handing him the second stack of $100 bills. They ushered the nervous man out the front door, leaving the two of them entirely alone with the forged legal weapon. Tyler picked up the fraudulent document and kissed it, holding it up to the overhead light, as if it were a sacred religious artifact. He pulled Brittany into a tight embrace, whispering into her ear that their miserable days of living on a budget were officially over. I sat in the dark luxury of my penthouse suite, watching their disgusting, triumphant embrace through the monitor. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I did not reach for my phone to warn them or to stop them from walking off the cliff. The cold, heavy feeling of betrayal had completely hardened into a solid wall of absolute resolve. They had willingly, eagerly chosen to cross the line from disrespectful children into federal criminals. They had just manufactured the exact rope they needed to hang themselves. I took a slow sip of my water, a calm, deeply satisfied feeling settling over my chest. The trap was perfectly set, and all I had to do was wait for the trap to snap shut. The very next morning, the heavy silence of my penthouse suite was shattered by the sharp ringing of my cell phone. The caller identification displayed Jonathan Carter's name. I answered immediately, expecting the precise update we had been anticipating. Harrison Jonathan said, his voice unusually tight and carrying an undeniable edge of urgency. They actually did it. The sheer audacity of these two is almost difficult to comprehend. He explained that his automated legal monitoring software had just triggered a massive red flag. The aggressive hard money lender Brittany had contacted was moving with unprecedented speed. They had already pulled the preliminary title report for the Montana property and officially filed a binding lien against the estate. Jonathan explained that the lender had completely accepted the forged durable power of attorney as absolute fact. Because the lender was a private predatory institution that thrived on rapid high-interest transactions, they completely bypassed the rigorous, methodical underwriting processes that a traditional commercial bank would legally require. They saw a pristine, unencumbered $18 million ranch, and their greed matched Brittany's perfectly. Jonathan was pacing in his office. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of his expensive leather shoes against his hardwood floor. "Harrison, we need to act this very second," he stated firmly, shifting into his aggressive legal mode. "I have an emergency injunction already drafted and sitting on my desk. If I file this motion with the federal court right now, we can instantly freeze the entire transaction before a single dollar moves across state lines. We can halt the mortgage process, lock down the property title, and immediately alert the federal authorities. Tyler and Brittany have officially committed wire fraud, identity theft, and severe real estate fraud. We can have the FBI waiting at their front door before the sun goes down today. They will be arrested, and your property will remain completely untouched." The proposition was incredibly tempting. I could end the nightmare right then and there. I could send the police to drag my son out of his house in handcuffs, putting an abrupt halt to the agonizing betrayal. But as I stared out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the freezing gray waters of Lake Michigan, a profound, chilling calmness washed over my entire body. I thought about the absolute cruelty in Tyler's eyes when he threatened to banish me to a miserable nursing home. I thought about Brittany gleefully celebrating my supposed destruction with a glass of expensive vintage champagne. If I stopped them right now before the money actually changed hands, they would hire slimy defense attorneys. They would cry and claim it was a terrible misunderstanding. They might even try to blame the corrupt notary entirely, claiming they had no idea the document was illegally altered. I could not allow them any room to escape the consequences of their wicked actions. "No, Jonathan," I said smoothly, my voice as cold as the winter wind outside my window. "Do not file the injunction. Do not alert the authorities, and absolutely do not freeze the transaction. Let the lender finalize the paperwork." Jonathan stopped pacing. The line fell completely silent for a long moment. "Harrison," he finally responded, his tone laced with genuine concern. "If we do not stop this right now, that predatory lender is going to wire $5 million directly into your son's personal checking account. They are going to place a massive legally binding encumbrance on Evelyn's generational land. You are allowing a monumental financial crime to be completely executed against your own estate." "I know exactly what I am doing," I replied with absolute, unshakable certainty. "If we stop the transaction today, it remains an attempted crime. They will fight it, and they will lie their way out of a severe punishment. But if we let the lender wire that $5 million into their account, the crime is fully completed. The theft is undeniably executed across federal lines. And more importantly, Jonathan, I want them to spend it. I want them to touch the money, to use it, to become completely dependent on it. Let them taste the luxurious life they are so desperate to steal. Let them build their entire fragile kingdom on a foundation of absolute fraud. When the ground finally crumbles beneath their feet, I want them to have absolutely nothing left to hold on to." Jonathan let out a slow, heavy breath. I could hear the deep respect and profound understanding settling into his response. "It is a brilliant, terrifying strategy, Harrison," he admitted quietly. "I will monitor the wire transfer. The moment the funds hit their account, the trap is officially locked. We will wait for your signal to drop the hammer." I ended the call and set the phone down on the glass table. The heavy feeling of anticipation settled in my chest. Over the next 3 weeks, I remained hidden in the luxurious isolation of my penthouse suite, quietly observing the spectacular, arrogant downfall of my own flesh and blood. I watched their daily activities through the hidden security cameras I had placed in their home, and I closely monitored their highly public social media accounts. The transformation was both fascinating and incredibly sickening to witness. Just 2 days after my conversation with Jonathan, the $5 million successfully cleared into their joint checking account. The explosion of their greedy, lavish spending was immediate and completely shameless. I watched through the glowing screen of my laptop as they laughed hysterically in their living room, tossing designer shopping bags onto the sofa. Brittany immediately went to a high-end luxury car dealership and purchased a brand-new custom-ordered Porsche, paying completely in cash. She proudly posted a dozen pictures of herself leaning against the metallic hood of the sports car, holding the keys up to the camera with a massive, triumphant grin. Tyler was no better. He went on a massive shopping spree, buying a collection of expensive designer watches that cost more than my entire yearly pension. He paraded them on his wrist, taking extreme close-up photographs to ensure everyone in his social circle knew exactly how much wealth he had supposedly acquired. He even had the audacity to boast about his financial genius in long, rambling video posts praising his own sharp business acumen. They booked spontaneous first-class flights to tropical resorts, drinking premium cocktails on pristine white sand beaches while posting inspirational quotes about how hard work and dedication finally pay off. It was entirely nauseating to witness such profound hypocrisy displayed so openly. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance. They paraded around the city acting like untouchable millionaires who had successfully conquered the world. They left huge cash tips at expensive restaurants just to show off. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted a clueless old mechanic. They thought they had perfectly executed the ultimate crime without leaving a single trace of evidence behind. They were so intoxicated by the smell of stolen money that they failed to see the monumental catastrophic danger looming just over the horizon. They did not realize they had just tied a $5 million noose around their own necks. 3 weeks of reckless spending flew by in a blur of designer labels and tropical vacations. As their bank accounts drained, their desperate ambition finally shifted toward the ultimate prize. They were ready to break ground on their stolen empire. I left my Chicago penthouse and flew quietly to Bozeman, Montana, arriving 2 full days ahead of their scheduled invasion. The morning air was incredibly crisp, biting gently at my cheeks with the refreshing, clean chill of the mountains. Evelyn's generational ranch was nothing short of a breathtaking masterpiece painted by nature itself. Towering emerald pine trees framed the expansive, rolling green pastures, while the distant snow-capped peaks of the rugged mountain range pierced the bright, endless blue sky. A wide, crystal-clear river wrapped around the eastern border of the property, bubbling gently over smooth river stones and providing a continuous, peaceful melody. It was a place of profound, sacred peace. I sat in a heavy, hand-carved wooden rocking chair on the sweeping front porch of the rustic Maine cabin. I was wearing my favorite faded flannel shirt and my scuffed leather work boots. I held a simple ceramic mug of steaming black coffee in my hands, letting the soothing warmth seep into my calloused palms. The profound silence of the vast wilderness was incredibly therapeutic. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, breathing in the fresh scent of the pine needles, feeling Evelyn's comforting presence surrounding me. I knew the tranquility was about to be violently shattered, but I felt absolutely no fear. I was simply waiting for the inevitable arrival of the storm I had carefully orchestrated. Right on schedule, the sacred mountain silence was abruptly broken by the distant, aggressive crunching of thick gravel. The harsh mechanical roar of heavy diesel engines echoed aggressively down the long, winding dirt driveway that led from the main highway to the cabin. I did not move from my wooden rocking chair. I merely opened my eyes and watched the massive dust cloud rising rapidly in the distance. The arrogant invasion force had finally arrived. Leading the aggressive parade was a massive gleaming black luxury sport utility vehicle, a premium rental clearly chosen to project an image of absolute untouchable wealth and superiority. Trailing closely behind the slick vehicle was a loud, chaotic convoy of heavy commercial construction equipment. 5 massive bright yellow bulldozers and heavy-duty excavators crawled slowly up the pristine driveway, their thick metal treads grinding mercilessly into the untouched earth. Flatbed trucks carrying stacks of steel fencing, temporary construction barriers, and advanced surveying equipment followed the heavy machinery. It was a grotesque mechanical army brought in to completely decimate my late wife's beautiful sanctuary. They were not just planning to casually inspect the property, to prepare it for a standard real estate sale. They had come to violently rip the earth apart to pour thick concrete over the lush green pastures and to rapidly erect the gaudy, overpriced luxury tech resort Brittany had so arrogantly designed in her greedy head. The sheer audacity required to bring a fully equipped commercial excavation crew to a property they did not legally own was absolutely staggering. The gleaming black luxury vehicle rolled to a smooth, highly practiced stop, just 50 yards from the edge of the cabin porch. The heavy diesel engines of the bulldozers idled loudly behind it, sending deep vibrations through the ground beneath my sturdy work boots. The driver's side door of the luxury vehicle swung open, and Tyler stepped out enthusiastically into the crisp mountain air. He was dressed in ridiculously expensive designer outdoor apparel that looked completely untouched by any actual physical labor. He wore a pristine, brand-new leather jacket, spotless denim jeans, and pristine boots that had clearly never seen a single day of actual dirt or mud. Brittany emerged eagerly from the passenger side wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a thick, luxurious fur-lined coat that dragged slightly against the gravel. She was holding an expensive artisan coffee in one hand and a remarkably thick roll of architectural blueprints in the other. Several other sleek rental cars pulled up behind their vehicle, and a large group of sharp-looking, highly arrogant investors stepped out. They wore tailored wool overcoats and carried expensive leather portfolios. Tyler and Brittany were laughing loudly together, an obnoxious, victorious sound that completely disrupted the peaceful, natural environment of the ranch. Brittany eagerly unrolled her large blueprints across the hood of the luxury car, pointing aggressively toward the beautiful riverside pastures. She was loudly explaining to the nodding, impressed investors exactly where the massive concrete foundation for the main luxury resort lodge would be poured. She gestured wildly toward the pristine tree line, enthusiastically describing how she was going to completely clear-cut the ancient pines to make room for a paved commercial helicopter landing pad. Tyler wrapped his arm proudly around her waist, soaking in the admiring glances and the verbal praise of his wealthy colleagues. They were reveling openly in their stolen glory, completely drunk on the powerful illusion of absolute financial dominance. I took a slow, highly deliberate sip of my steaming black coffee, quietly savoring the rich, bitter taste against the cold morning air. I remained perfectly still in my wooden rocking chair, waiting patiently for them to finally look up from their arrogant, fabricated delusions. Brittany quickly finished her loud, passionate presentation to the eager investors, rolling up the heavy blueprints with a sharp, dramatic snap of her wrist. She turned her attention toward the rustic main cabin, pointing her manicured finger aggressively toward the wooden structure to explain exactly where the heavy demolition crew should strike first. Her outstretched hand froze completely in midair. The bright, victorious smile on her face instantly melted away, rapidly, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Tyler closely followed her paralyzed gaze, his own arrogant, confident smirk evaporating the very second his eyes locked directly onto mine. He physically stumbled backward in pure shock, nearly tripping over the uneven gravel driveway, his face rapidly draining of all color until he looked completely pale and sickly. The loud, obnoxious laughter of the wealthy investors died abruptly as they sharply noticed the sudden, terrifying shift in their host's demeanor. Tyler and Brittany stood absolutely frozen in the dirt, their mouths hanging slightly open in complete and utter disbelief. They stared at me as if they were looking at a terrifying, vengeful ghost that had just risen directly from the grave to haunt them. They had genuinely believed I was securely locked away in some miserable, underfunded state nursing home, hopelessly medicated, severely confused, and completely stripped of all my legal rights. Yet here I was, sitting comfortably on the front porch of the $18 million property they were actively trying to steal, calmly watching them with the steady, incredibly cold eyes of a man who held every single winning card. The absolute paralyzing terror radiating from their stiff bodies was incredibly satisfying to witness in real time. The invisible trap had officially closed tightly around them, and there was absolutely no safe place left for them to run or hide ever again. The profound shock that paralyzed Brittany quickly dissolved, replaced by a frantic, defensive rage. I watched her manicured hands begin to tremble, not out of guilt, but out of a desperate need to maintain control over the fabricated reality she had carefully constructed. She violently shook her head, as if physically trying to dislodge the undeniable truth sitting right in front of her. She reached into her expensive handbag with aggressive movements and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. It was the forged, durable power of attorney, the very document she and Tyler had illegally altered in the dark of night. She gripped the fraudulent paperwork so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white. She took a bold step toward the porch, her high heels crunching loudly against the gravel driveway. She pointed her finger directly at my chest, her face contorting into a mask of desperation and vicious entitlement. "Harrison! What in the world are you doing here?" she shrieked. Her shrill voice echoed harshly against the mountain backdrop, disturbing a flock of birds nesting in the nearby pines. "You are not supposed to be here. You are supposed to be back in Chicago. You have absolutely no legal right to step foot on this property." She waved the stack of forged documents frantically in the air, like a desperate flag of surrender, pretending to be a banner of victory. She turned wildly toward the group of wealthy investors who were exchanging concerned, nervous glances. "Do not listen to a single word this man says," she yelled to the crowd, her voice cracking with mounting hysteria. "He is incredibly sick. He is suffering from severe dementia, and he is confused. He has been legally stripped of all his financial and medical rights. I have the official notarized paperwork right here in my hand to prove it. He is a trespassing, senile old man who has escaped his state-mandated care facility." Tyler remained frozen near the SUV, his eyes darting frantically between me, his screaming wife, and the heavy machinery idling loudly in the background. He was a coward caught directly in the headlights of his own massive deception. Brittany realized her husband was paralyzed by fear, so she took complete command of the situation. She spun around and marched toward the foreman of the excavation crew, a burly man in an orange safety vest, looking incredibly skeptical of the unfolding drama. "What are you waiting for?" Brittany screamed at the confused foreman, her face turning a bright, unnatural shade of crimson. "We are paying you a massive premium to get this job done on schedule. I am the legal owner of this massive estate. I am giving you a direct order to begin the demolition process this exact second. Tell your bulldozer operators to push straight through those wooden gates and flatten that cabin. Do not let that crazy old man stop you from doing your job. If he refuses to move from the porch, call the local police and have him dragged away for trespassing on a private commercial construction site." The heavy diesel engines of the yellow bulldozers roared louder, thick, black smoke, billowing out of their exhaust pipes into the crisp mountain sky. The ground beneath the porch vibrated intensely as the metal treads shifted slightly forward. The wealthy investors began to slowly back away toward their rental cars, sensing the deep instability of the situation. They were ruthless businessmen, but they did not want any part of a messy, highly publicized family dispute over land ownership. Despite the deafening noise of the machinery and the frantic, hysterical screaming of my daughter-in-law, I remained perfectly resolutely still. I did not raise my voice to defend my mental capacity. I did not stand up from my wooden rocking chair. I raised my ceramic mug to my lips and took another slow, deliberate sip of my steaming black coffee. My absolute calmness infuriated Brittany even more. She felt her false authority slipping rapidly through her fingers, completely unable to comprehend why the broken old mechanic she bullied in Chicago was now sitting before her like an immovable mountain. "You are going to regret this," Harrison Brittany threatened, marching back toward the front porch. She was breathing heavily, clutching the forged papers to her chest. "We have the legal backing of a massive financial institution. We have $5 million securing this resort project. You are going to be locked inside a padded cell by the time the sun goes down, and I am going to watch them pour solid concrete right over this miserable little cabin." I lowered my coffee mug and rested it gently on my knee. I looked at her with an expression of profound pity and absolute zero mercy. "You talk a great deal about the law, Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through the roar of the diesel engines with sharp, undeniable clarity. "But you clearly have absolutely no idea how the law actually works in the real world." Before she could muster another venomous response, the solid oak door of the main cabin clicked loudly. The thick iron latch released, and the heavy door swung slowly inward, revealing the dark interior of the house. The arrogant, triumphant smirk on Brittany's face instantly died. She stumbled backward, bumping harshly into Tyler, who had finally managed to take a few hesitant steps toward the porch. Stepping out from the shadows of the cabin was Jonathan Carter. My cutthroat, highly expensive trust and estate lawyer looked absolutely lethal in a sharply tailored dark navy suit that sharply contrasted with the rustic wilderness environment. He held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand and adjusted his expensive silver-framed glasses with the other. He looked down at Tyler and Brittany with the cold, evaluating gaze of a highly trained predator who had finally cornered its desperate prey. But Jonathan was not alone. Following closely behind him, stepping out onto the wooden planks of my front porch, was the local county sheriff. He was a tall, incredibly imposing man, wearing a crisp, authoritative tan uniform, a wide-brimmed Stetson hat, and a shining silver star pinned prominently to his broad chest. His hand rested casually, but purposefully on the heavy leather gun belt wrapped tightly around his waist. Flanking the formidable sheriff were three heavily armed, remarkably serious-looking county deputies. They fanned out across the porch, their sharp, unblinking eyes quickly scanning the crowd of wealthy investors, the loud construction crew, and finally locking directly onto Tyler and Brittany. The sudden, overwhelming presence of formidable law enforcement instantly drained whatever false courage Brittany had managed to summon. The loud, aggressive roar of the bulldozers abruptly ceased as the highly confused foreman hastily signaled his machine operators to kill their massive engines. A heavy, suffocating silence rapidly descended upon the massive Montana ranch, broken only by the gentle, distant bubbling of the nearby river. The balance of power had shifted in a matter of mere seconds. The arrogant wolves who falsely thought they were leading the hunt had just realized they were standing directly in the center of a perfectly designed, inescapable cage. Jonathan descended the wooden steps of the porch with the smooth, unhurried grace of a man who knew he held absolute control over the entire situation. He stopped just a few feet away from where Tyler and Brittany were standing, completely paralyzed in the crushed gravel. The wealthy investors murmured nervously among themselves, taking another collective step backward toward their luxury rental vehicles. Jonathan slowly opened his sleek leather briefcase. He reached inside and extracted a thick stack of official legal documents, securely bound by a heavy blue seal. He held the crisp papers up high, ensuring that every single person present in the driveway, from the heavy machinery operators to the wealthy businessmen, could see the prominent federal insignia stamped across the front page. He cleared his throat, projecting his sharp, authoritative voice across the sprawling mountain property. "I am Jonathan Carter, the primary legal counsel representing the sole owner of this estate, Mr. Harrison Mitchell," he announced loudly. "I hold in my hand a binding federal court order signed by a federal judge less than 24 hours ago. This document officially nullifies any and all current claims to this land made by anyone other than my client." Jonathan lowered the packet slightly, fixing his piercing gaze directly onto Brittany. "The piece of paper you are currently clutching in your trembling hand is not a valid legal instrument. It is a clumsily fabricated forgery born from a deeply arrogant and highly illegal conspiracy." Brittany opened her mouth to protest, but the words completely failed to materialize. Jonathan did not give her a single second to recover her shattered composure. He turned his attention to the crowd of investors, making sure they understood the monumental legal liability they had almost stepped into. "The document these two individuals presented to you and your financial backers was originally a highly restrictive, short-term medical proxy," Jonathan explained, his tone echoing with lethal professionalism. "We have irrefutable high-definition video and audio evidence proving that Tyler Mitchell and his wife intentionally altered that expired document in their dining room. They willfully forged my client's signature to manufacture a fraudulent, general durable power of attorney. They committed severe federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and monumental real estate fraud." The air in the driveway seemed to instantly freeze. The wealthy investors looked at Tyler and Brittany with absolute disgust and mounting horror, realizing they had been aggressively courted by two desperate federal criminals. Tyler began to physically crumble under the crushing weight of the sudden exposure. His breathing became incredibly shallow and erratic. He clutched his chest, his eyes darting frantically around the property as if searching for a magical escape route that simply did not exist. He was hyperventilating, taking short, desperate gasps of the crisp mountain air. His knees buckled slightly, forcing him to lean heavily against the hood of their rented luxury vehicle just to remain standing. The arrogant, wealthy businessman facade had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, trembling boy who had finally been caught in a monumental lie. While Tyler was physically shutting down from the overwhelming panic, the local county sheriff stepped purposefully off the wooden porch. His heavy boots crunched loudly against the gravel as he marched directly past my son and daughter-in-law. He did not even look at them. Instead, his sharp eyes were locked onto a figure cowering near the back of the luxury convoy. It was the nervous man in the cheap, ill-fitting gray suit. The corrupt notary had foolishly traveled with them to Montana, hoping to secure another illegal cash payout for facilitating the final property transfer. The man tried to quietly slip behind a heavy flatbed truck to escape into the dense pine forest, but the sheriff was significantly faster. "Do not even think about moving another inch," the sheriff commanded, his deep, booming voice, stopping the corrupt notary dead in his tracks. The sheriff reached the trembling man and forcefully grabbed his arm, spinning him around to face the crowd. "You are officially under arrest for your direct involvement in an ongoing federal forgery conspiracy," the sheriff stated clearly. He reached down to his thick leather gun belt and unclipped a pair of heavy, shining silver handcuffs. The loud metallic ratcheting sound of the cuffs locking tightly around the notary's wrists echoed sharply across the quiet mountain valley. It was the definitive, terrifying sound of a criminal scheme violently colliding with absolute justice. "You have the right to remain silent." The sheriff continued reciting the Miranda warning with practiced cold authority as he marched the sobbing notary toward the back of a waiting patrol cruiser. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you?" The notary nodded frantically, tears streaming down his pale, sweaty face as he was shoved roughly into the back seat of the police vehicle. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing his fate. The visual impact of seeing their hired accomplice instantly arrested and thrown into the back of a police cruiser sent another violent shockwave through my son. Tyler covered his face with his hands, letting out a pathetic, muffled sob. He was watching his entire fabricated life completely unravel before his very eyes. The luxurious cars, the expensive clothes, the elite social status, all of it was built on a deeply rotten foundation of lies, and now the entire structure was violently collapsing directly on top of him. But Brittany simply refused to surrender. Her profound, toxic entitlement completely blinded her to the catastrophic reality of their situation. The sight of the arrest did not humble her. It only ignited a frantic, cornered desperation. She stepped away from her hyperventilating husband and marched aggressively toward Jonathan, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated defiance. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my lawyer. "You think you are so incredibly smart," she screamed, her shrill voice echoing across the silent pastures. "You think a simple court order about a forged signature changes anything at all? It does not matter what you say about the power of attorney. We already won." She turned and pointed fiercely toward the massive, untouched acreage spreading out behind the main cabin. "We secured a $5 million commercial mortgage against this property 3 weeks ago. The funds have already been completely dispersed. We used this land as the primary legal collateral." She turned back to face me, her chest heaving with exertion, her eyes wide with a frantic, delusional sense of victory. "We owe a ruthless private financial institution $5 million, Harrison," she yelled directly at me, a wicked, triumphant smile forcing its way back onto her trembling lips. "And they placed a massive, legally binding lien directly onto this estate. If you try to stop this development right now, we will simply default on the loan. The lender will forcefully seize the land and evict you entirely. You are trapped, old man. You lose completely. Either way, we win. Period." Brittany stood there, panting, her chest heaving with her wicked delusion. She believed her hastily constructed mountain of debt was an unbreakable shield. She thought the momentum of her crime would steamroll over the legal reality. I placed my coffee mug gently on the small table next to my rocking chair. I slowly stood up, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. I walked down the porch steps, my boots crunching deliberately against the gravel. I did not look at my screaming daughter-in-law. I walked past her flailing arms and stopped inches in front of my son. Tyler was leaning heavily against the hood of the black luxury vehicle, his face a portrait of sheer, unadulterated panic. I looked him dead in the eye, searching for any lingering trace of the little boy I had once loved so dearly. I found absolutely nothing but the hollow, terrified gaze of a cornered thief. "You really thought you had outsmarted everyone," I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of the silent mountain valley. "You thought stealing $5 million using a forged document was a brilliant business strategy. But you forgot one very important detail about your mother. She was always 10 steps ahead of you." Tyler blinked rapidly, his breathing shallow and erratic. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy wheeze escaped his dry lips. Brittany scoffed loudly from behind me, but I completely ignored her. 2 years ago, I continued ensuring every single syllable landed with maximum devastating impact. Long before your mother grew severely ill, we sat down with Jonathan Carter in his Chicago office. We knew that the rampant commercial development in Bozeman was aggressive, and we knew that greedy developers would eventually try to tear this beautiful sanctuary apart. So Evelyn and I made a permanent, irrevocable decision to protect her family legacy. We placed the entire 1,500-acre estate into a strictly protected federal conservation easement. I let the legal terminology hang in the freezing morning air, watching the arrogant investors behind Tyler suddenly stiffen in absolute shock. The wealthy businessmen immediately understood the catastrophic weight of those words, even if my foolish son and his delusional wife did not. Brittany marched up beside her husband, her face twisted in a confused sneer. "I do not care what kind of stupid environmental paperwork you signed," she spat venomously. "A lien is a lien. The bank owns this land now." Jonathan stepped forward, positioning himself squarely beside me. He adjusted his silver glasses and looked down at Brittany with an expression of profound professional pity. "You truly are remarkably ignorant regarding federal property law," Jonathan stated smoothly. "A federal conservation easement legally and permanently strips all commercial development rights from the property in perpetuity. That means this land legally cannot be subdivided, it cannot be commercially developed, and it absolutely cannot be used as collateral for a commercial mortgage by anyone ever. The deed is permanently restricted. The massive loan you secured 3 weeks ago is completely fraudulent, not just because you forged the power of attorney, but because the underlying asset you pledged legally does not exist in the commercial market." The investors immediately began rushing toward their rental cars, frantically dialing their own attorneys. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a federally restricted property entangled in a massive wire fraud investigation. The loud construction foreman swore under his breath, violently waving his hand to signal his crew. The heavy flatbed trucks and yellow bulldozers began shifting into reverse, eagerly abandoning the contaminated job site. The grand, luxurious resort Brittany had viciously planned was evaporating into thin air before her eyes. The devastating reality finally began to penetrate Brittany's thick skull. Her jaw dropped open, and the fraudulent documents slipped from her trembling fingers, fluttering aimlessly to the dirty ground. But the nightmare was far from over. I took a step closer to Tyler, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "You did not borrow money from a traditional, heavily regulated commercial bank," I reminded him, my tone utterly merciless. "You went to a ruthless hard money lender to bypass the standard background checks. You borrowed $5 million from private, predatory financiers who do not care about your excuses or your apologies. They only care about recovering their capital by any means necessary." Jonathan nodded in agreement, pulling a final document from his sleek leather briefcase. He handed it directly to my terrified son. "Since the collateral you provided is legally void due to your extensive federal fraud, the lender has already triggered the acceleration clause in your loan agreement," Jonathan explained clearly. "They are aggressively demanding the immediate repayment of the entire $5 million principal plus astronomical penalties and legal fees. And because you signed those loan documents personally, They are coming directly after your actual verified assets to satisfy the massive debt. Tyler stared blindly at the acceleration notice in his shaking hands. The words blurred together through his tears. As of this morning, the predatory lender has officially initiated aggressive seizure protocols against everything you actually own, Jonathan continued ruthlessly. They are currently foreclosing on your expensive home in Chicago. They have sent repossession agents to collect the brand new luxury sports car you purchased in cash last week. They have legally frozen your personal bank accounts, and they are actively seizing your entire retirement portfolios. Everything you bought with their stolen money and everything you previously owned is now entirely gone. You are completely bankrupt and you are millions of dollars in insurmountable debt. The crushing, suffocating weight of absolute financial ruin finally broke my son. The arrogant facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Tyler let out a loud, agonizing wail of pure despair. His legs gave out completely, and he fell heavily to his knees in the cold Montana dirt. The expensive fabric of his designer pants tore against the sharp gravel, but he did not care. He dropped the legal notice and buried his face in his trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably, like a frightened, helpless child. "Dad, please," Tyler begged, his voice muffled by his tears and the dirt. He reached out with a shaking hand, grabbing my worn jeans. "Please save me. You must help me. I am going to prison. I owe $5 million. I will do anything. Please fix this." I looked down at the weeping man kneeling at my feet. Beside him, Brittany snapped. She realized she was shackled to a bankrupt felon carrying a massive debt. She let out a scream of pure fury. "I want a divorce," she shrieked, backing away from her sobbing husband as if he were a disease. "I am leaving you. I am done with you." The deputies stepped forward, holding the screaming woman back as she threw her handbag at Tyler's head. Their destruction echoed loudly across the beautiful valley. I did not comfort my son. I did not offer forgiveness or salvation. I simply reached up and adjusted the brim of my weathered cowboy hat. They thought this devastation was the end of their nightmare. But they were wrong. I had not revealed Evelyn's final ultimate punishment yet. I looked down at the pathetic display of the man kneeling in the crushed gravel at my feet. Tyler was still clutching the fabric of my weathered jeans, his tears mixing with the dry Montana dirt as he desperately begged for a salvation he completely failed to deserve. The sound of his frantic sobbing echoed against the heavy wooden beams of the cabin porch, blending with the distant frantic screaming of his new wife as the county deputies continued to hold her back. The chill of the mountain air felt incredibly sharp, perfectly matching the profound coldness that had firmly settled into my chest. I gently, but very firmly, pulled my leg back, forcing his shaking hands to release their desperate grip on my clothing. He slumped forward, his forehead nearly touching the toes of my heavy work boots, defeated in every possible way a man could be defeated. It was a tragic, miserable sight, watching my own flesh and blood completely crumble under the crushing weight of his own monumental arrogance and unadulterated greed. But my heart remained completely resolute. I did not feel an ounce of the desperate paternal urge to reach down and pull him out of the massive hole he had enthusiastically dug for himself. Instead, I slowly turned my head toward Jonathan Carter, giving my trusted attorney a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Jonathan immediately understood the silent command. The time had finally come to deliver the absolute final blow, the devastating reality check that Evelyn had carefully orchestrated long before she passed away. Jonathan stepped forward once again, his expensive leather shoes crunching methodically against the driveway. He unclasped the shining silver latches of his sleek briefcase for the very last time today. The sharp click of the briefcase mechanisms seemed to briefly cut through the loud, chaotic noise of Brittany's ongoing hysterical meltdown. Tyler slowly raised his tear-stained face from the dirt, his red, swollen eyes tracking Jonathan's deliberate movements with a mixture of absolute terror and pathetic, lingering hope. He foolishly believed that the powerful lawyer might be pulling out some sort of miraculous legal lifeline a hidden loophole that could somehow save him from the $5 million debt and the impending federal prison sentence. But Jonathan was not a savior for the wicked. He reached deep into the darkest compartment of his bag and carefully extracted a thick, heavily bound legal packet. It was completely distinct from the federal court orders and the rapid foreclosure notices he had presented just moments prior. This particular document was encased in a heavy cream-colored folder, sealed tightly with a dark red wax stamp that bore the official insignia of the highest estate court in the city of Chicago. It was pristine, untouched, and incredibly sacred. Jonathan held the folder with a deep, profound reverence, treating it with the absolute respect that it commanded. He stepped directly beside me, holding the heavy packet out so that Tyler could clearly see the thick, elegant, cursive handwriting printed across the front cover. Tyler wiped his dirty, wet hands against his torn designer jeans and squinted through his tears. He read the words aloud, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic whimper. The last will and testament of Evelyn Rose Mitchell. The sound of his mother's full name hitting the freezing mountain air caused a violent, visible shudder to violently rip through his entire trembling body. I looked down at my trembling son, finally, allowing a fraction of the profound sorrow I felt for him to show in my steady eyes. "Your mother was a remarkably brilliant and incredibly observant woman, Tyler," I said, keeping my voice low, steady, and utterly impossible to ignore. "She saw every single thing you tried to hide behind your expensive tailored suits and your flashy imported cars. She watched you slowly abandon the strong, honest values we spent decades trying to instill in you. She knew long before her illness took her away from us that you were incredibly weak. She knew that you were completely consumed by a toxic, incredibly insatiable greed that would eventually blind you to absolutely everything that actually mattered in this entire world." Tyler let out another agonizing, pathetic sob, burying his face back into his dirty hands. I continued speaking, refusing to grant him even a single second of emotional reprieve. "But despite all of your profound flaws, despite the terrifying darkness she saw growing rapidly inside your heart, she still loved you more than life itself. She was your mother, and a mother's love is the most powerful, irrational force on this earth. She genuinely wanted you to have a beautiful, secure future. She desperately wanted to ensure that you would never have to struggle or worry about financial stability, even after she was permanently gone from this world. She wanted to give you the magnificent world you were so desperately trying to conquer, but she wanted to do it on her own terms, in a way that would protect you from your own worst, most destructive impulses. So she made a very specific, deeply secretive, and incredibly powerful plan." I intentionally paused, letting the incredibly heavy emotional weight of my words sink deeply into his totally shattered, panicked mind. I took a slow, deep breath of the freezing mountain air before delivering the incredible revelation that would haunt him for the absolute rest of his miserable life. "Evelyn did not just leave you a few sentimental trinkets or a small, modest savings account," I explained slowly, articulating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. 2 years ago, working directly with Jonathan, your mother quietly liquidated several of her highly profitable private investments. She gathered a massive amount of incredibly clean, perfectly legal, and entirely untraceable liquid cash. She took all of that pristine money and securely locked it away into a heavily fortified, deeply private blind trust. She deliberately structured this massive financial vehicle to remain completely invisible to any public records, ensuring that no greedy spouses or predatory lenders could ever discover its existence. I watched Tyler slowly raise his head, his tear-filled eyes widening with a sudden, painful realization. The absolute staggering truth was finally beginning to penetrate his thick, arrogant skull. The total verified value of that hidden trust account was exactly $10 million, I stated firmly, watching the color completely drain from his pale, dirty face once again. $10 million in pure, unencumbered cash. Tyler. It was meant to be entirely yours, completely free and clear. It was a completely legitimate, massive fortune that required absolutely no forged signatures, no corrupt notaries, and no predatory high-interest loans. Your mother carefully designed the trust to automatically transfer complete unchecked ownership of the entire $10 million balance directly into your personal bank accounts on the morning of your 35th birthday. She wanted you to have the absolute freedom to build the luxurious life you so desperately craved without ever having to compromise your soul to get it. You were already a millionaire, Tyler. You just had to quietly wait 3 more very short years for it to beautifully and safely arrive right into your hands. Tyler stared up at me with eyes so wide they looked as though they might shatter. His mouth opened and closed silently, struggling to form words that simply did not exist. He was trying to process the magnitude of the fortune he had just learned about. $10 million, clean, legal, and waiting for him. But before he could even begin to beg for that money, Jonathan stepped forward, holding the pristine cream-colored folder open in his hands. The brilliant attorney looked down at the ruined man kneeling in the dirt, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. Evelyn was not just generous, Jonathan said, his crisp voice cutting through the freezing mountain air. She was also profoundly realistic about the darkness she saw taking root in your character. She knew that simply handing you a massive fortune could either be your ultimate salvation or your absolute destruction. Therefore, she explicitly instructed me to construct a highly specific, unbreakable legal failsafe directly into the foundation of the blind trust. Jonathan adjusted his silver-framed glasses and looked down at the heavy parchment paper. She called it the character clause, he explained calmly. It was a rigorous set of behavioral conditions that you had to maintain in order to inherit the funds. Evelyn wanted to ensure that the wealth she spent her entire life accumulating would never be used to reward cruelty, abuse, or unchecked greed. She demanded that her son prove himself worthy of the legacy before he was allowed to touch a single cent. Jonathan cleared his throat and began to read directly from the last will and testament. The legal language was sharp, precise, and completely unforgiving. The clause explicitly states that if Tyler Mitchell is ever found guilty of committing any act of elder abuse against his father, Harrison Mitchell, the trust is immediately voided, Jonathan read aloud. Furthermore, if Tyler attempts to forcibly evict his father from his primary residence, or if he attempts to unlawfully manipulate, mortgage, or sell the Montana estate prior to his father's natural passing, the entire $10 million balance of the trust is to be instantly and permanently redirected. Jonathan lowered the document and looked Tyler directly in the eyes. Evelyn designated a very specific, heavily underfunded children's hospital in downtown Chicago as the alternate beneficiary. And because you explicitly conspired to evict your father, forged a durable power of attorney, and fraudulently mortgaged this exact property, you have unequivocally triggered every single violation listed in this clause. As of 8 o'clock this morning, when the predatory lender finalized the fraudulent wire transfer, based on your forged signatures, the automated legal triggers within the trust were permanently activated. The entire $10 million was immediately routed to the hospital. The transfer is completely irrevocable. The money is entirely gone, Tyler. It is already saving the lives of sick children, and you will never see a single penny of it. The sheer staggering magnitude of his own stupidity finally crashed down upon Tyler like a collapsing brick wall. He had been so incredibly desperate to fund his wife's luxurious delusions that he had completely blinded himself to the love and security his mother had quietly built for him. He had eagerly traded a guaranteed legal $10 million fortune for a fraudulent $5 million loan that was currently destroying his entire life. By listening to the toxic whispers of his greedy wife, by choosing to treat his grieving father like a disposable piece of trash, he had literally set fire to his own massive inheritance. He had burned down his own magnificent castle just to steal a few miserable scraps from the ruins. Tyler let out a visceral, agonizing scream that tore from the very bottom of his soul. It was not a cry of sorrow. It was the horrific sound of a man mourning his own monumental failure. He violently clawed at his own hair, rocking back and forth in the sharp gravel, completely overwhelmed by the catastrophic reality of his choices. He was going to a federal prison. He was millions of dollars in insurmountable debt. He had lost his home, his cars, his career, and his father. And he had done it all to himself. He was the sole architect of his absolute destruction. Every single lie he told paved the road to this exact moment. While Tyler was drowning in a sea of his own making, Brittany was experiencing a terrifying revelation of her own. She had stood silently near the luxury sport utility vehicle, her mind frantically calculating the devastating legal and financial blows Jonathan had just delivered. The arrogant smirk that usually decorated her face had been completely wiped away, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She slowly looked down at her sobbing husband. She realized with absolute clarity that the wealthy, successful man she thought she had easily manipulated into funding. Her lavish lifestyle was now nothing more than a bankrupt felon. She was officially shackled to a man with zero inheritance, zero assets, and a massive federal target painted squarely on his back. She had alienated her own family to marry him, and now she was staring down the barrel of crushing poverty and severe criminal charges for her active role in the forgery. The realization snapped whatever fragile shred of sanity she had left. Brittany let out a deafening, hysterical shriek. She lunged forward, her expensive high heels kicking up the dirt as she threw herself directly at Tyler. She descended upon him like a rabid animal, her manicured hands transforming into vicious claws. "You absolute worthless idiot!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, swinging her fists wildly at his head and shoulders. "You ruined everything. You lost $10 million. I hate you. I want a divorce right now. I am leaving you." Tyler did not even try to defend himself. He just stayed curled in a pathetic ball, absorbing her physical blows as if he believed he deserved them. The 3 armed county deputies immediately sprang into action. They rushed forward, their heavy boots thudding against the driveway, and grabbed Brittany by the arms. She thrashed and kicked violently, spitting hateful curses at my son as the strong officers physically dragged her away from him. They pulled her back toward the line of waiting patrol cruisers, her expensive fur-lined coat dragging through the mud. I stood on the porch, my hands resting calmly at my sides, watching the chaotic, violent end of their marriage unfold right in front of me. I felt no joy in their suffering, but I also felt no remorse for allowing the absolute truth to shatter their wicked illusions. The toxic, greedy empire they had tried to build on my back had been completely reduced to ashes. They had thought I was just incredibly weak. They arrogantly assumed my silence was just a sign of total surrender. Instead, it was simply the quiet patience of a man allowing true justice to take its natural course. The crisp, freezing mountain wind blew across the vast, open, empty pastures, sweeping the very last remnants of their shattered dreams entirely away forever. 3 months passed since that explosive morning on the gravel driveway of the Montana ranch. The crisp autumn air slowly gave way to a heavy, freezing winter, burying the sprawling green pastures beneath a thick, pristine blanket of pure white snow. The violent, chaotic dust that Tyler and Brittany had kicked up with their arrogant arrival had long since settled into the frozen earth. Back in Chicago, however, the catastrophic consequences of their profound greed were still actively destroying every single aspect of their miserable lives. The highly publicized divorce between my son and his wicked wife was incredibly bitter, a toxic spectacle that played out in the ruthless courtrooms and the unforgiving court of public opinion. Brittany, who once prided herself on projecting an image of absolute, untouchable luxury, was now drowning in a terrifying nightmare of her own creation. When the dust settled, she found herself completely abandoned by the wealthy social circle she had spent years desperately trying to impress. Her so-called friends vanished the exact moment the federal investigators knocked on the door of their Chicago home with a comprehensive search warrant in hand. The federal authorities did not care about her expensive designer clothes or her meticulously curated social media presence. They only cared about the irrefutable high-definition video evidence showing her actively conspiring to alter a legal medical proxy. Brittany was officially indicted on multiple severe counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. She was currently out on a heavily restricted bail, wearing a bulky, humiliating ankle monitor that tracked her every single movement. She spent her days crying in a tiny rented room, desperately trying to secure a plea deal that would keep her out of a federal penitentiary, though her expensive defense attorneys privately admitted that severe jail time was virtually guaranteed. Tyler did not fare any better in the devastating aftermath of his monumental betrayal. The ruthless hard money lender they had foolishly defrauded moved with the terrifying mechanized efficiency of a starving predator. Because the underlying collateral for the $5 million loan was completely voided by the strict federal conservation easement, the private financial institution immediately executed the aggressive acceleration clause. Tyler was forced to declare total absolute bankruptcy. The spectacular Lincoln Park home, the very same house I had foolishly helped them purchase with a massive down payment just a few years prior, was aggressively foreclosed upon and immediately seized. The terrifying repo agents showed up in the dead of night to drag away the brand new custom-ordered Porsche Brittany had arrogantly purchased in cash. They seized Tyler's expensive designer watches, froze his retirement accounts, and completely drained every single checking and savings account attached to his name. The luxury lifestyle he had brutally betrayed his own father to secure evaporated into thin air, leaving him with absolutely nothing but an insurmountable mountain of terrifying debt. He was completely stripped of his arrogant corporate title. The prominent consulting firm he worked for immediately terminated his employment the very second the severe federal fraud allegations became public knowledge. No respectable company in the financial sector would ever hire a man actively implicated in a massive money laundering and real estate fraud conspiracy. The proud, arrogant businessman who had once stood in my living room and cruelly threatened to lock me away in a miserable state. Run nursing home was now living a reality he once deeply despised. Tyler was forced to move into a tiny, cramped studio apartment located in a highly dangerous, severely neglected neighborhood on the far outskirts of the city. The walls of his new home were paper-thin, the heating barely worked, and the constant blare of police sirens provided the nightly soundtrack to his profound misery. To barely survive, to simply put cheap processed food on his small, wobbly table, my son had to swallow whatever remaining shred of pride he still possessed. He found employment as a minimum-wage data entry clerk at a massive windowless distribution warehouse. He spent 10 grueling hours a day sitting in a gray, sterile cubicle staring blankly at a flickering computer monitor, mindlessly typing endless rows of shipping numbers into a massive, soulless database. His days were incredibly long, deeply humiliating, and completely devoid of the glorious, wealthy future he had so desperately tried to steal. Every single time he looked at his meager, heavily garnished paycheck, he was forced to violently remember the $10 million inheritance he had literally set on fire. The agonizing, suffocating regret was a heavy, inescapable chain wrapped tightly around his throat, punishing him for his wicked choices every single day of his ruined life. While Tyler was busy suffocating under the crushing weight of his catastrophic consequences, I finally found the profound, undisturbed peace I had been desperately seeking since Evelyn passed away. I returned to the majestic Montana ranch, the sacred sanctuary my beautiful wife had incredibly wisely entrusted entirely to my care. The bitter cold of the harsh mountain winter did not bother me. In fact, the freezing temperatures and the thick, silent snow felt incredibly cleansing, as if the rugged land itself was actively washing away the dark, toxic stain of my son's betrayal. I sat comfortably on the heavy wooden rocking chair on the sweeping front porch of the rustic Maine cabin wrapped warmly in a thick wool blanket. I held a simple ceramic mug of steaming black coffee in my calloused hands, listening to the gentle, continuous melody of the crystal-clear river flowing softly in the distance. The frantic, ugly noise of the city, the cruel manipulation of my daughter-in-law, and the heartbreaking failure of my son felt like they belonged to an entirely different, incredibly distant lifetime. I was finally truly free. I did not just sit on the porch, letting my actual wealth gather dust in a hidden bank account. I knew that Evelyn had not protected this incredible estate just so an old mechanic could live out his final days in absolute selfish isolation. She believed that true wealth was measured by the genuine healing it could provide to those who were truly suffering. Honoring her magnificent legacy became my ultimate driving purpose. Using a significant portion of the extremely clean, perfectly legal funds secured safely within my own private accounts, I began a beautiful transformation of the sprawling property. I did not build the gaudy, overpriced luxury resort Brittany had arrogantly designed. Instead, I carefully established a small, quiet, and profoundly respectful equine therapy center dedicated exclusively to serving heavily disabled military veterans. I hired experienced, compassionate trainers and purchased several gentle, incredibly intuitive rescue horses. We opened the heavy wooden gates of the ranch to men and women who carried deep, invisible scars, providing them with a safe, sacred space to slowly rebuild their shattered spirits through the incredible healing bond of horsemanship. I smiled warmly at the falling snow, feeling absolutely certain that my beloved Evelyn would be profoundly proud of the magnificent, lasting peace we had finally built together, firmly ensuring her precious, sacred memory would beautifully survive for countless wonderful generations to come. The winter sun finally dipped below the jagged mountain peaks, casting long, dark shadows across the snowy pastures. The biting wind began to pick up, howling softly through the dense pine trees. I took one last look at the pristine valley, feeling the deep chill finally seep through my thick wool blanket. I pushed myself up from the wooden rocking chair, my boots thudding softly against the porch planks. I turned and walked inside the main cabin, shutting the heavy oak door firmly against the freezing night. The sudden quiet of the interior was immediately comforting. The cabin smelled of aged cedar and the sweet lingering scent of pine wood burning in the massive stone hearth. I walked over to the kitchen, a simple space filled with memories, and poured myself a fresh, steaming cup of dark coffee. I wrapped my calloused hands around the warm ceramic mug, feeling the steady heat radiate through my skin. I made my way to the worn leather armchair positioned directly in front of the crackling fireplace. I sat down heavily, letting the deep comfort of the thick cushions swallow my tired bones. The golden flickering light of the dancing flames illuminated the dark room, casting warm, soothing shadows against the rustic walls. For the first time in what felt like an absolute eternity, my shoulders completely relaxed. The tight, agonizing knot of anxiety and betrayal that had been painfully gripping my chest for months finally unraveled. I was completely alone, but I did not feel lonely. I felt an incredible, profound sense of absolute peace. I raised my eyes slowly and looked at the wide stone mantel situated just above the roaring fire. Resting perfectly in the center was the beautiful silver-framed photograph of my late wife, Evelyn. The warm firelight danced across her smiling face, making her look almost alive, as if she were sitting right there in the room with me. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee, letting the bitter, rich taste ground me in the present moment. I spoke to her out loud, my voice steady and completely clear in the quiet cabin. I told her that I had done exactly what she asked of me. I told her that our beautiful sanctuary was completely safe from the greedy, destructive hands of those who sought to tear it apart for their own selfish gain. I told her that the legacy she had spent her entire life carefully building was perfectly secure, protected forever within the conservation easement, and now serving a truly noble purpose. I looked deeply into her bright, loving eyes in the photograph, feeling a profound wave of bittersweet emotion wash over me. I had kept my solemn promise to her. I had protected our sacred home, but to do so I had to completely destroy the fabricated world of our only son. It was not a victory I celebrated with joy. It was a solemn, incredibly heavy duty that I carried out with a broken heart. I told her how incredibly hard it was to watch our boy fall to his knees in the dirt, begging for a salvation he did not deserve. I told her how much it physically hurt to walk away from him when he needed me the most. But as I stared into the flames, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the only correct choice. Tyler had allowed a toxic, insatiable greed to completely rot his moral foundation. He had willingly chosen to align himself with a cruel, manipulative woman who viewed his own father as nothing more than an obstacle to be discarded. They had eagerly conspired to forge legal documents, steal millions of dollars, and throw me into a miserable state facility without a single ounce of genuine remorse. If I had simply forgiven him, if I had paid off his massive debts and shielded him from the predatory lenders, I would have only validated his monstrous behavior. I would have taught him that he could commit federal crimes, abuse his family, and suffer absolutely no real consequences. I would have been actively participating in his moral destruction. By stepping back, by allowing the incredibly harsh reality of the legal and financial system to crush his arrogant delusions, I delivered the hardest, most agonizing lesson a father could ever possibly give. I forced him to stare directly into the terrifying abyss of his own terrible choices. I stripped away the luxurious safety net he had always taken for granted. He is now living in a cramped, miserable studio apartment, working a grueling minimum wage job, and facing a lifetime of severe financial ruin. He is finally learning the true, undeniable value of hard work, honesty, and accountability. It is a brutal, unforgiving existence, but it is the exact life he meticulously built for himself through his own wicked, deceitful actions. Many people might look at my story and quickly call me incredibly cruel for pushing my own flesh and blood to the absolute brink of total ruin. They might say that a father should always protect his child, no matter the cost or the crime. But at 70 years old, after surviving a lifetime of hard work and painful betrayals, I have learned a very harsh, undeniable truth. Parental love should never serve as a bulletproof vest for the unchecked greed and deliberate criminality of a child. If you constantly shield them from the devastating consequences of their monstrous actions, you are not saving them. You are only teaching them how to become much better, highly efficient monsters. True love, the kind of profound love that actually has the power to save a rotting soul, sometimes requires you to completely step aside and let life hit them with absolute full force. It requires you to watch them shatter into a million pieces, so that they might finally learn how to rebuild themselves into something genuine, something honest, and something real. It is without a doubt the most painful, heartbreaking lesson a parent can ever deliver. But it is also the only lesson that truly lasts. The pain I caused my son was immense, but it was a necessary surgical pain designed to cut out the toxic infection that was rapidly killing his humanity. I took one final deep breath, finishing the last warm drop of my coffee. I leaned back into the worn leather armchair, closing my tired eyes, as the heat from the crackling fireplace washed over my face. I finally have my peace, and my beautiful wife finally has her justice. If you have ever had to make a truly heartbreaking, agonizing decision to teach your own child a profoundly hard lesson about fundamental respect and real-life consequences, please share your personal story in the comments section below. I read every single one, and it helps to know that none of us are truly alone in these difficult family battles. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen to my story today, and I genuinely wish you all a truly wonderful day.